Welcome to part 1A of the replacement radiator table, sliding radiator table build, not part 2. Part 1's already out there, link above and down below in the description. I decided at the end of the last video that I was going to edge band the plywood, and herein lies the reason for this video. If you go on to YouTube, there are an absolute plethora of videos about edge banding plywood with hardwood. But what I think they fail to make a point of is the suitability of the approach that you're taking, and whether you actually need to go those extra steps and buy those extra tooling parts to use that approach. So in the past, and you'll have seen me do it quite often, I've literally just glued a straight cut piece of hardwood to the edge of a piece of plywood, and it's been more than adequate, that amount of glue surface, to be a decorative piece or a protective piece for the edge of a bit of ply or MDF, where it's not under a lot of work stress and not getting beat around a lot, which, as I mentioned, is my point. If you're edge banding a piece of plywood for a decorative element, then why do you need to go of all the expense of tongue and groove bits or V-joint bits or wedge tongue and groove bits? You really don't need to. You don't even need biscuits on it if you can hold it in place while the glue sets. That amount of surface on that 80mm piece is more than enough to keep it there permanently. To step it up a notch, if you've got an awkward piece to hold, then you could use biscuits or dominoes, which I've done in the past. Great for alignment, a little bit of extra strength on it, but again, you've got to ask yourself, do you need it? And for this purpose, I could really argue that just gluing the two flat surfaces together, mating them together, would be more than adequate for the job. But for this job, I've decided to go OTT and buy myself a set of radiator cutters, wedge tongue and groove radiator cutters. One, because I don't have a set and I'd really like them. Two, because if I was to use dominoes or biscuits, then it's very fiddly holding such a small piece in place while you cut the domino or biscuit joint. And three, because I don't have a set and I'd like a set here ready for any other jobs where I deem they're suitable. This set of radiator cutters came from a company called 𝑨𝒐𝒊𝒏𝒔𝒕𝒆, quite an appropriate name. I've no affiliation with them. They don't know me from Adam. I bought these with my own money. They're made by Whiteside, a brilliant company. Love the radiator bits. I came across radiatorcutters.co.uk when I was looking for replacement cutters for my Incra set, the fence system that I use on the radiator table. As mentioned, this is the wedge set of tongue and groove matching radiator cutters. I'll put an image up on the screen, so you probably won't see that from there. So the hardwood I've decided to use is 𝒐𝒊𝒏𝒌. Two reasons. One, I've got quite a bit of it, so I can afford to take that out of stock and use it for this project. And number two, it's going to end up being quite a good colour match. It's very close to the colour of the ply, as you can hopefully see. So I'm going to run the hardwood down to about 20mm, giving me 1mm each side. Then I'll cut the joint with a set of red cutters, and then I've got some Whiteside spiral flush trim bits. I've got an upcut and a down cut, because I'm not sure which way I'm going to run that, whether it's going to be on the radiator table or on handheld. So I thought I'd cover both bases while I was putting in an order. So in this video, I'm going to test this approach. I've just cleaned my blade to within an inch of its life, and I can now actually see teeth as opposed to sap. So I've got a far better chance of getting a nice clean cut. Well, I noticed, however, that I've nearly run out of blade cleaner. And I've been using the Axminster blade cleaner for I don't know how many years, and it's been okay. It's done the job, but with a lot of brushing with a stiff nylon brush. So if anybody's got any suggestions as to the most incredible blade cleaner on the planet ever, I'd be grateful. to hear your thoughts. So I've got my fence set to a hair over 20mm, so that I've just got a little bit to plane off any saw marks that I get, even though I've got a superbly clean blade that looks absolutely brand new now. And then I can run it through the thickness there afterwards, just to take it down to 20mm, giving me 1mm either side to clean off with the flush trim bit. Sounds perfect. That blade was like a hot butter through knife. It was beautiful. I am always stunned at how much difference it makes and why I don't do it more often. Not only is this going to be a test of the router bit set that I've brought the jointing method to glue the hardwood lipping to the edge of the plywood, but it's also going to be a test of cutting the plywood splinter free. Now I've loaded in my 48 tooth, the highest number tooth blade that I've got for this saw. This particular blade is all but a brand new. So I'm going to try first to cut with the grain and then a cut across the grain without using any other techniques, just to see whether I can get a good clean crisp cut straight from the blade. So this is the cut on the top of the board, and along the grain is absolutely perfect, and across the grain is also beautiful. Underneath, along the grain, absolutely perfect, and across the grain, on one end I've got some small chip out, very little, but I'm quite happy for that to be on the hidden side. So that's a success. So on to cutting the actual joint between the plywood and the hardwood, I've chucked up the female cutter, or the cutter that's going to cut the female component, which is going to be in the plywood. And what I'm going to do first of all is to set the cutter to, I'm going to say approximately, but as close to half as I can possibly get at. I've got a little bit of wiggle room with the 1mm overlap either side, but that's looking pretty damn perfect to me. Happy with that, so I'm going to lock that off, and then I'm going to pull my fence forward and set the fence so it's flush with that top cutter. What I'd really like to achieve, because I'm worried about this top cutter splintering out that very top veneer, so first of all I'm going to try it with the saw cut being the finished mating surface, if you like. So I'm just going to wind that forward that little bit and try that. I also want to do it in 2 passes, so I'm going to set this slide-in scale on the Incra fence to 0 at that point that I've just locked in place. Yeah, so I'll start with a 3mm pass just to lighten the load, and then I can move forward to my 0 position, which, as I say, will just leave that back cutter shy of that face. And if that face isn't good enough, then I'll have to move it forwards just that little bit more to take a tiny bit off and possibly adjust that outfeed fence. But I'm going to try that first and see how it goes. Beautiful finish, look at that, the joys of a brand new router bit, eh? So I've swapped the bits over now, and to align them I'm going to use that outside pins there, and that looks perfect to me. So lock off the height. I'm going to take my steel rule, set that on the fence, and then I'm going to bring that back until we touch, but I want this to be a little shallow as well, so that the tongue part of the lipping isn't too proud and doesn't pre-engage, if you like, with the back. I'll also have just a little bit of room in that groove then for the glue. So once again, I'm going to set that to 0 and then drop back a little 3mm again from my first pass, and then move the fence back to 0 for the second pass. So you can see I'm slightly off with my middle point there. This side has got a larger reveal shoulder than this side. However, I've enough overlap on both to compensate for that with this test, but makes a mental note to be a little bit more careful, ensuring I've got the centerpiece. And I think it would make logical sense to cut this piece first to make the alignment easier. As far as the two surfaces mating are concerned, that is a beautiful fit, and there's just a tiny little hair of a gap there between the tongue and the very bottom of the groove, so there'll be a little bit of room there for a bit of glue build up. What I'm going to try first of all is just with the tape and see whether that gives me enough pressure to keep the two pieces together. I forgot to mention I've cut the mitre on the end as well, so that I can test every aspect of it going together, including whether all my tools are set up correctly. So these two surfaces have mated wonderfully, but there's a gap on that corner. So we'll try these corner block clamps I made a while ago. If I need to revert to these on the bigger boards, that could be a problem. You can already see that with the extra pressure of the clamp, that mitre has closed up perfectly. So I'm going to need to clamp on the full size. So we'll let that dry and then we'll trim it back. That's come out pretty darn good. The clamps made the difference. So I'm thinking I could use a bit of tape to hold them in the exact place I need them while I put the clamp on. The bigger panels are going to need the bigger clamps that I've got, the longer clamps. And the only ones I've got that are long enough are the big parallel clamps, which could be a little bit fun. So initially I'm thinking I've got 3 different approaches I can use when flush trimming these bits back. Number 1, the simplest approach is this little Bosch router, which has got such an extended base on it. It balances itself beautifully. And I feel like with a bit of care, that may well be the only approach I need. The other approach I could take is a different base with a parallel fence on it and then an extra piece on the fence, so I could rest it against the face of the board and use that for extra stability. And then I've also got the ability to pop it in the router table, but of course that won't work for the larger pieces. So initially I'm going to try this approach on this test piece and see how well that goes. I don't know if you can see that from there, but the issue I've got is the max length of the bit won't let me get past these little glue spots here. So they're gonna have to come off prior to any cleanup. So that's got to come off. With care, obviously, because I'm now looking at finished surfaces. So there's a couple of little places there where I've tilted with the router, which I obviously don't want to do. So if I'm going to use that approach, I'm going to have to clamp an extra support piece to the back side of the panel. But now let's pop a bit of finish on it and see what it looks like. So for the finish on this piece, and indeed on all of my workshop equipment, cabinets, I use Polyvine extreme heavy duty varnish. I believe it used to be called floor varnish. I use it on the doors in the house as well because it is amazing. Brings out the colour beautifully, easy to apply, recoatable in 1 to 2 hours depending on the environment. Fully cured in, I think they say 12 to 16 hours. Fully cured, 48 before you give it heavy use. I give it 3 coats, and then when it's all fully cured, it is such a protective finish. It's rock hard. And I think that's going to look superb. So here's the finished test piece. And hopefully you can see that the joints between the hardwood and the plywood are good. The miter joint is good. And on the back side, again, this will be the hidden side, and this is the little bit of tear out that I mentioned earlier. However, there's a couple of digs there where I've overbalanced with the router, and another one there. So lessons learned. Number 1, did I need the router bit set, the router cutter set? In my opinion, no. I think my normal approach of just gluing the 2 flat surfaces together, a butt joint with the odd biscuit or domino in it to help with alignment, is more than adequate for this project, for this purpose. Going to the extra time, trouble, expense of the router cutter set, not needed. However, now I've bought it, I fully intend to use it because it works superbly, as you would imagine. Point number 2, I'm going to be cutting the hardwood, the male section of the joint first, because that's going to make alignment of the male to the female much easier. Point number 3, I don't think I need a 20mm piece of hardwood on an 18mm piece of ply. I'm going to go with 19mm, and I'm going to take more time making sure I get that router set to dead center. So I'll probably use a marking gauge for that as opposed to a tape measure and a pencil. And finally, trimming off the excess, the overhang on the hardwood, using the flush cut trim bit in the handheld router. I need to take more time and be more careful, or even better, I'm going to need to put an extra support piece on the flip side, the back side of the piece that I'm routing, just to make sure I don't tip over and get those awful gouges that you saw. But apart from that, very happy with the approach. Very worthwhile exercise, well worth the time to make up a little mock and to prove your intended approach in a larger project. So there's nothing left for me now but to crack on with the router cabinet proper. Hope you'll join me for that. See you in part 2. Thanks for watching. Ta-ra.